Welcome. This video is a lesson on graphing circles, and within this lesson you will learn how to find the radius of a circle, determine the diameter of a circle, calculate the midpoint of the diameter, and memorize the equation of a circle. Now, if you're not familiar with the basics of graphing, you can look at my other videos, and one in particular is the Introduction to Graphing. First of all, what is a circle? A circle is a two-dimensional figure which is round in shape and all the points are equidistant or the same distance from the center point to the circumference. And we see circles everywhere in our daily life, so it is important to know what a circle is and how to measure it. So we see circles in nature, we see them in our music, we see them in our food, as well as our transportation and in our art. The radius of a circle is the distance from the exact middle to the circumference, and it's labeled as r. If you need to find the distance of a radius, you will use the distance formula, the square root of the difference in x squared plus the differences in y squared. And with this particular problem, you could probably just count from your one point to the other and see that it's 4. However, you might not have a straight horizontal line and it might be diagonal where you can't just count the 4 spaces. So using this example, you would identify that your first point is -6, 1 and your second point is -2, 1. Plug in your x's and your y's and you find that your distance formula will be the square root of -6 minus -2 squared plus 1 minus 1 squared. And solving that, your radius is equal to the square root of -4 squared plus 0 squared, or the square root of 16, or 4. So your radius is 4. And keep in mind with the distance formula, you can move your x's and y's around. So instead of -6 minus -2 squared, you could also have -2 minus -6 squared. You would end up with a positive 4 squared, and your 1's really wouldn't make a difference because it's 1 and 1 squared. And you would still end up with a radius with a distance of 4 units. A diameter is a straight line passing from one side of your circumference to the other, and it goes directly through the center of your circle. And to find the distance, you could either use the distance formula, or if you already know your radius, you could do 2 times the radius. If you need to find the midpoint, it is the exact middle of your diameter and the exact middle of your circle. So let's say you want to find the midpoint of a circle. And again, this one's pretty easy. You could probably just count the units and find out what the middle is. But it's not always that easy. You might have a diagonal line where you can't just count because not every space is equal distance because it cuts off some squares. So using the midpoint formula, you have x plus x divided by 2. So you have to identify what your coordinates are, and then for your y's, you'd have your different y values divided by 2. Keeping that in mind, your first coordinate pair is -2, 2, and your second is 6, 2. So adding your x's together, you have 6 plus -2 divided by 2, and then your y's together would be 2 plus 2 divided by 2. And calculating each one separately, you have 4 over 2 and 4 over 2. So your midpoint would be 2, 2. And it's right in the middle, which is what we want for midpoint. The equation of a circle is just something you have to know. Like for a equation of a line is y equals mx plus b. For a circle, it's x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared, where hk is your midpoint and the radius is obviously the radius is the r squared. So let's say you have your equation already, x minus r squared plus y minus 2 squared equals 25, and you need to draw this circle. So your center would be 3, 2, even though it has -3 and -2, your original equation has x minus h and y minus k. So that tells you that your center is positive. If it was x plus 3, that would tell you that your 3 is actually negative, which is counterproductive, counterintuitive. but it's something that you need to keep in mind. So x minus 3 is actually a positive 3. So we know our center point is 3, 2, and that's something we can plot on the graph. And our radius, well, actually our radius squared is 25, but we can find the square root of 25, which would be 5. So our circle would be 5 units from every point on the midpoint, and this is how we would graph our circle. Let's say, here we go, we have x plus 3 squared plus y minus 1 squared equals 16. So instead of having a positive 3, now we would have a negative 3. So our center point would be negative 3, 1, because we have a x plus 3 instead of x minus 3. And our radius would be 4 because we're taking the square root of 16. So we can plot negative 3, 1 on the graph, and then our circumference will be 4 units from every point on that midpoint. Now let's say you have the circle but not the equation. You could easily go back and forth between this. You could easily say, I know this point. I can count negative 3 points backwards on the x-axis and 1 point up on the y-axis, and plug that into your equation and count the 4 units over to your circumference, and then square that 4 to make 16. So you could easily find your equation if you were not given the equation first. As a review, your radius is the distance from the circumference to the middle of the circle, and it's only half the distance of the diameter. So you would use distance formula to find the radius if you couldn't just count the units. And here is your distance formula. Same for diameter, you would use the distance formula, and it is the longest distance from end to end of your circle going through the middle. And you use the distance formula, or you can do 2 times the radius if you already know your radius. So if you're having a line that goes through your circle but it doesn't go through the midpoint, then that is not a diameter. That's known as a chord, but that's not something we're going to go over through in this video. Something else that we need to review is the midpoint. It is the exact center of your circle, and you'd use the midpoint formula. And here it is for you. And your circle is an infinite shape. It is something that you would have to use the equation of a circle for, and here is your equation. Thank you for listening.